Hi there. My name is David Batsoffen and I host a travel blog called Travel and Things. At the moment, I'm doing a series called In Conversation With. And today I'm chatting with Meg Parker, who is, I really don't know, aside from being an author. Meg, hi. What do you do? How do I introduce you?
That's quite the question, David. Well, lovely to be here chatting with you. I too have my coffee.
Good.
And yeah, I suppose I would describe myself really first and foremost as a naturalist. I just love the bush. I'm a bush enthusiast and have spent the last 20 odd years of my adult career just living in and learning about and communicating about the natural environment. So yes, I'm an author. I've written numerous natural history titles. I'm also a production specialist. So I work with media, all within the wildlife space. And yeah, at the bottom of it, I love the natural environment. I love the bush. I love wildlife. And I've made it my lifelong passion to communicate and to teach others about wildlife. I've spent time as a guide. I've spent time training guides. I spent many years training guides. I've spent time writing about the bush or about wildlife. I've spent time filming wildlife and telling visual stories. And yeah, so it goes.
And people may remember you by a different surname with 50/50.
Absolutely, yes. The good old days. I was Megan Emmett, and most of my titles have been published under that surname as well. And did almost a decade with 50/50 in the production role there.
Yeah, last year I bumped into two guys at Safari Guide of the Year, and I sort of recognized voices and faces, and it was Quinton and James, who were presenters on 50/50 in the early days.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, Quinton in the very early days, and then James a couple of years ago. He was wonderful to work with. It was a breath of fresh air for me to have a real bush boy in the studio once a week. So yeah, no, he was fabulous. Yes.
I interviewed him a couple of weeks ago, and I don't want to say traumatized by the thought of having to interview him, but you know, chatting to somebody who's a professional in the conservation and field guiding industry, and B, somebody who presented on 50/50, and not just here's a talkie having sex, now you can have a Land Rover Discovery as a gift. It was a bit more than that. was a little bit daunting, but we had a great conversation.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, I think first of all, people in front of cameras are always just very normal people when you get down to meeting them. And second of all, I think people in the wildlife industry are all kindred spirits. So everybody tends to get along and tends to be fairly down to earth. We're all in it because we love the environment and we just want to see that message get out there. Yeah. So James certainly ticks those boxes.
He does indeed. So let's chat about one of your books. Let's start with the book that I'm sort of take everywhere with me, and this is in fact my second copy because I don't know what happened to the first. I think it got left somewhere, or maybe it was pilfered, but I don't want to cast aspersions on anybody. And it's this Game Ranger in Your Backpack, and you need a backpack to carry this thing. This is not a sort of over a minute's reading. This is a great book. So talk to me about this, Meg. How long did it take you to put together? And is this a standalone, or might there be a volume 2?
So yeah, Game Rangers, I see it as my baby, really. I have a great fondness for that book, and it's done extremely well. It came out in 2010, and people have really used it for its intended purpose, and that's been so rewarding for me to just see naturalists and people interested in the bush just picking it up and running with it, and it's still just printing off the Chazang, really, because it's so popular for that use. And basically it came about, I was working for eco training at the time and training sort of level 1 guides, and just discovered that people really battled to kind of assimilate information out of those giant sized volumes that you find mammal books and tree books and that kind of thing. So I say to my students, go and look up 5 interesting things about an impala. and they'd kind of come back and say, well, the males have got horns and the females don't. And so to find the really interesting information, the stuff people want to know when they're on drives, the things I want to know when I stop and look at a herd of impala, it was just proving quite tricky. So that's where the idea came from, is let's create a book that tells in little easy to digest packages, and that's where the format came from, that sort of mind map format with lots of pictures. And if you're looking at this, then you know this is probably the kind of information that you're wanting to know. And absolutely it was almost to teach game rangers the kind of information that they would then need to impart to guests, and the type of interpretive packages they would need to package it in. But then at the same time, if you were just a self-drive guest in Kruger, then you could take that with you and have access to the same information. And that's why it was called sort of Game Ranger in your backpack. Initially it was going to be pocket, but we decided we couldn't possibly sell it as Game Ranger.
There's no way you're going to fit this into a pocket unless you've got deep pockets, Meg.
Exactly.
The interesting thing is that you bring up Impala straight away. And I think Impala are very underrated. And the problem is that there are too many of them. So you'll drive into a park, everybody goes ooh-ah, because they're invariably either white rhino or Impala are the first animals you see. And then you sort of go, yeah, the next time you see them, okay, they're nice. And by the third time, they're just background noise. And you stop looking at them, and you shouldn't, because they are spectacular to photograph in the right light, and they're really interesting to watch.
They are fantastically interesting to watch if you know what to watch for, if you know the kinds of behaviors to look out for. And I think also, I mean, they're incredibly successful animals. So you mentioned that there's too many of them. Well, there's probably not too many of them because everything eats them. So there needs to be lots. But they're a fantastically successful species that they can proliferate in such great number in spite of the fact that everything eats them. And there's a number of survival strategies and adaptations that they've evolved that allows them to do that. And it's unpacking that information and understanding what they're doing and why they're doing it that I personally find so fascinating about the lesser known species, Impala for one. But I mean, you can take any animal and it will have a suite of adaptations and a suite of behavioral strategies that suit it to its lifestyle. And Game Ranger in so many ways is about imparting all of that great nitty-gritty interpretive information, and not only on the mammals, of course, but birds, reptiles, all the most common things you're likely to find, and even trees and plants and tracks, the sort of less obvious stuff, all condensed into one book, which is why it's such a big volume, as you point out.
I think one of the best lessons I ever learned was from Bruce Lawson, who said to me, if you learn no other bird calls, learn what a call an oxpecker makes, because one day it might save your life. It's those sort of little bits of information, because nowadays with Google, I think a lot of people go to the bush thinking that they've Googled the big five, and now they know everything there is to know about those, and they want to fight back sometimes when the field guide says X and they've read up on Dr. Google that it's Y. And then this is where these sort of left of center information becomes so useful. And I love anecdotes, bush anecdotes, be they real or fake. I don't care. If you can entertain, inform, and educate all at the same time, good for you.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that's the joy of learning anything, isn't it? Is that it's not just a matter of getting facts, it's a matter of enjoying the process. And
True.
I always say to people that are trying to learn trees, it's a matter of persisting with the first couple and trying to get your head around the first couple. And as soon as you know a little bit, that desire to know more then kind of kicks in. And I suppose that's the basic rule of being a naturalist is, you know, when you're learning birds, you start with a Cape turtle dove or a black-collared barbet or something easy, and as soon as you can recognize those calls, suddenly you feel like you've got some ammunition in your arsenal. So learning the next one then becomes more of a kick, and so it goes. As you learn more, the desire to know more grows. And so, I mean, yes, absolutely. That's, I referred earlier to trying to make information accessible to people throughout my career, just by translating perhaps more complex things that come across so boring in so many ways into a more engaging and digestible format, because it should be fun. It absolutely, I mean, yeah, the bush is wonderful. I can't get enough of it, and I just so want that for everyone.
I hear what you're saying, because at the moment, being a non-traveling travel writer and specializing in bush destinations, it's beyond frustrating. Beyond
no,
frustrating.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
I know that every morning in the last year when I was going out on a regular basis, every morning when I saw either impala or maybe a waterbuck or something in the morning, I always greeted them going, "You made it through the night. Good for you." Because there are those that don't make it through the night. The herd wakes up in the morning and goes, "Hey, Bob's gone. I wonder what happened to him." I have Gary Larson often in the back of my head when I go into the bush. His cartoons speak to me. But this is the thing. It is. You mentioned the fact that everything eats them, and it's true. Even baboons will eat baby impala. So to make it through the night is quite a thing, because you and I both know that if you drop a human into the middle of Kruger National Park, they won't last the night. They will wander around screaming for help, making themselves visible to everything that's got teeth and claws.
Although I don't know that I necessarily support that, because so many people believe that they would just automatically be eaten, and wildlife are not like that. They're not out there to eat us. I mean, yes, an encounter with a lion or a leopard at night is a different thing to during the day, but let's not terrify people into thinking they're going to get eaten in the park.
Talking about terrifying, what do I hear barking? Is it some sort of small lapdog?
No, not at all. And I must apologize. We have two very, very unruly bull terriers.
Okay.
And I don't know if you know the breed at all, but they are they have minds of their own. So, and no amount of is going to calm them down. So I have locked them in the garden and I've closed all the doors, but they are still making themselves heard.
It's not a problem. E-type pigs is what sometimes they refer to as, because they look like them.
Yeah, so, there's actually a book called When Pigs Fly, which is all about bull terrier behavior. Yes. They are very special creatures on God's planet.
They are indeed. Megan, with the book, is there a possibility that this will end up as an app? I mean, this is a huge work to translate into an app that you can have on your phone. But this seems to be a way that a lot of these books are going, so that you've got it, if you're sitting in a vehicle, you don't have to pull out a huge book like this. Although I know, as I said to you, this goes to the bush with me all the time, because this becomes my nighttime reading. I don't take novels to the bush.
Does it put you to sleep?
No, I just pick a page and open it. And the fun thing for me is how often I'll open it on the same page. And it's just the way it works. So I'll read a couple of pages until I nod off, because the bush has that effect on people, because there's too much fresh air and all of that, and too much food. So the question is, long way around, is this going to end up as an app at some particular point, perhaps?
David, I investigated the option of developing an app through different sources several times over. And it's an interesting concept, the whole app thing. And what seems to have happened in sort of more recent times is that, how do I explain this? Basically, apps don't make money. So converting it, but they cost a lot of money to develop. So putting in all the finances and the resources and the time to convert it into an app, and certainly one that has some value, that's not just basically an ebook, is an enormous investment. A lot of people, so for example, Sassel that sponsors the
bird book.
the Sassel birds,
Mm.
obviously then would have sponsored the bird app.
Yeah.
And it becomes an add-on to the book, and often corporates and that kind of thing will develop apps, and then that will become kind of a gift or an add-on, or if you buy the book you can download the app, kind of thing, as a special thing. But it's just like on a personal level, Shem, the photographer that I worked with on Nature and Pact, and I investigated turning that book into an app, and it was just too astronomically expensive to do it. I went to go and see an app specialist, and I mean, they develop heaps and heaps and heaps of these apps, and he just said to me, on a personal level, I wouldn't do it. He said, if you can get a sponsor to do it, or a company that wants to do it for their clients, you know, that would be the way to go. So from my personal perspective, no. And as far as I know, Breezer, the publishers that have done that don't have apps. I mean, they use the Call Finder laser pen on their books. And that's kind of the route that they've gone. And in a sense, you know, I kind of have a mixed feeling about it in this context. I mean, I love my tree app and I love my birding app. But when I'm in the bush and I want to access something, I want a book in my hand. I want to be able to page through to look at what I'm looking at. And also in places like Kruger, you don't always get signal. So if your app, you know, relies on being able to access signal and that kind of thing, it doesn't always work. So, I mean, that's a very long answer to kind of say, I looked into it and no, unless somebody would like to step forward and give me some development funds, it's not going to turn into an app anytime soon.
I was waiting for you to say, when you went to the app developer, he took one look at your book and he sort of went, there's an app for that. Because there seems to be an app there are apps for apps. You know, nowadays you can open an app with another app. It's really ridiculous. Then you mentioned Sassel, and I suppose I can intrude briefly. Their 5th edition that's been updated is spectacular. It really and truly is. And at their launch, they were already talking about volume 6 or the 6th edition.
Wow.
In 5 years' time, they're already working towards that. But I mean, this is what 10 years old now, and it's as valid now as it was when you first wrote it. It's beautifully written and beautifully photographed. This is Sean.
Yes.
I bumped into him, Sean Patrick. I bumped into him at Eco Training. And I heard the name, and I thought, I know you from somewhere. And that was one of the few times that I didn't have the book with me. We spoke about it at length, but no autographs, unfortunately. Waiting for your signature.
When lockdown's finished and Clara will have to make a plan to do that.
We will indeed. A question out of left field. Tell me about Meg Emmett in Matric. What was she like?
That's really a left field question.
And I've had the exact same response from every single guest that I've asked it of.
I might have to go into the recesses of my brain to remember her. She existed a very long time ago. Meg Emmett in Matric, I think in one word, a nerd. I was a very diligent and nerdy, conscientious student. I was determined to do well, but even back then was very much ready to engage in a career in wildlife. I wanted to work in wildlife since I was a child. I suppose the world was my oyster back then, and I mean, you're so naive. I was 17 when I finished matric, so very young, and just about to go off to Sarsveld. And anybody who knows Sarsveld, it was a forestry college. It's part of the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University, but a satellite campus in George, which is where I studied conservation. And yeah, I just had no idea what was waiting for me in the big world. So somewhat unprepared, I must say, to go from an all-girls school. I went to Potch Girls High, so to go from that all-girls school environment and a very protected childhood and a very nerdy disposition on life, just trying to do my work and do well, into this big forestry college. Yeah, it was a bit of a shock, but yeah, I have to say, sort of, what's this, 2020, we are 25 years out of school this year. So, and yeah, I look back and I'm grateful for the opportunities I had back then, and can't say I've been disappointed with the journey since.
So
so does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. But at no point in your career did you think of saying, would you like fries with that, or can I ring that up for you, type of thing? You went from school, you knew exactly already, or you knew at school already what you wanted to do with the rest of your life.
Absolutely. In fact, in matric, I was, in my holidays, I was volunteering at Karen Trendler's rehab center in Pretoria, ARC, as it was called in those days. And just, even from standard 9, I would beg my parents to take me through there in the holidays so that I could kind of get hands-on with these wild animals and be a part of all of that in preparation for my career. I was very fortunate to have parents who loved the bush. My dad in particular, who gave my mom the same gift as he gave me in teaching her how to love the bush. He grew up in northern Natal and spent his childhood running around barefoot in the wild, and knew quite a bit, and he used to take us to the bush on holidays and all of that sort of thing. So really sort of had the passion burning in me for all of this, and he had friends in Pilanesberg in the management. So, you know, when they first brought the lions into Pilanesberg, as children, we got to go and see those lions in the boma, all drugged, and had photos, you know, holding their enormous paws and all of that kind of thing, which made an enormous impression on my very young and vulnerable mind at the time. So I had no idea of the realities of this sector, I suppose. It's far from glamorous, but yeah, just was so excited to get stuck into a life that involved wildlife and wild places.
And before we get on to the next book, can I talk to you a bit about 50/50? How did you get into that, and what was that like for you?
It was a wonderful era in my life. I loved my time at 50/50. I loved working at Clive Morris Productions, the production house that produced it. It exposed me to so many different aspects of the wildlife industry and the environmental industry. And in fact, in the middle of my tenure at 50/50, I decided to go and do a master's in environmental management, just because I'd had so much exposure and I just wanted to know more. And I remember sort of early on sitting in this class and feeling quite intimidated, because a lot of the people there were, you know, sort of execs and stuff from not execs, but professionals from places like Department of Water Affairs and you know, these big agencies and state organizations and that sort of thing. And at the time, you know, the rhino issue was really big, and there was a lot of discussion around sightings. And, you know, some of the water people were like, sightings? What's sightings? You know, fracking was a big contentious topic at the time, and also people were like, what's fracking? And so if it seemed like if you were in this niche sort of zone, no matter how much you knew and how important you were, the exposure that I'd had just working on all this media stuff was absolutely phenomenal. I just kind of dabbled in all these different sectors and had exposure to all these different topics, which was just extraordinary. And it took that for me to kind of go, wow, you know, it's been a real privilege to have had access to this kind of information and to learn so much, really. Getting into it was serendipitous, I suppose. I had been working in Kenya. I'd gone to Kenya on a 6-week contract, actually, with Eco Training to do some training there, and I'd come back 6 months later.
Sounds about right for Eco Training.
Yeah, it was a wonderful adventure in and of itself. I spent heaps of time in Tsavo and in the Masai Mara training guides there. it was 2009, and Game Ranger was just about to come out. I remember we were doing the proofs. Just a little sidetrack. I remember being in the middle of Tsavo, and in those days it just was such poor internet signal, and we had to drive the Land Rover right up this hill, and I would use a dongle and plug it into my computer, and then stand on top of the Land Rover to try and get signal, and I'd have a student holding my computer up, and I'd be typing madly just to try and get book proofs back to the publisher in time. It was a crazy time, but anyway, and yeah, it was kind of strange, because prior to going to Kenya, I'd kind of sent my CV out, as one does when you kind of in a gap in your career, thinking I'd be back in 6 weeks' time and needing something new. And yeah, I just came back to South Africa at the end of 2009, and there was an email there from Clive Morris saying that my CV landed on his desk, and did I have any interest in joining the team? They were putting a new team together. At the time, there'd been a very, very long break. So all the sort of old school guys, the guys that had been with 50/50 for the long haul, had kind of dissipated and gone off and found new things to do. And so they needed to start up with a new team. And yeah, and so I was like, yes, I would be interested. I mean, 50/50 had been a part of my childhood and a part of what had shaped my interest in wildlife. So it was a real privilege to be able to get involved there, and was taken on the content front. And within 2 years, my boss at the time had moved on, and it was just a sort of a natural progression for me to then take over in the senior producer role. And yeah, it was fantastic. I loved it. It was completely crazy. 50/50 is a monster production. It's just this huge sausage factory for 39 weeks where you're just creating environmental content en masse.
But working out of very small premises.
Yes, yeah. I mean, and we were a very, very small team. We were a tiny little team.
Yeah, you were indeed.
Working with a big network of producers that we commissioned stories from, obviously for reach across the country. But yeah, no, a wonderful, wonderful part of my life, and one that I'm very, very grateful for. So, yeah.
I think there were 2 programs that came out of that era. One of them is still around, and that was 50/50 and Noot vir Noot. And I mean, they're totally divergent, but my parents, when Noot vir Noot was on, I couldn't phone them. If I didn't know, I'd phone them, and they'd pick up the phone, can't talk now, Noot vir Noot, and put it down. And then they'd phone me back when they finished watching. But they were both institutions. I mean, I jokingly referred to the Tok-Tokis having sex for a Land Rover Discovery, but it was invariably those images that won that Land Rover, 250,000 rands worth of vehicle for a picture of mounted beetles, basically.
Yeah, and that competition is still going. I mean, I think some people even confuse the brand 50/50 with Veldfocus, because it's just, it's such a big part of the program. And now with cell phones and all this technology, obviously the quality and the level of photos and videos that come in is just extraordinary, and the kinds of things that people see and send in is just, really, really interesting. So it's a different competition to back in those days, that's for sure.
Do you have a favorite story that you did during your time at 50/50?
Favorite story? Sure, that's very hard. I mean, there were many. I loved the outside broadcasts. Those were always enormously fun. So the one in particular that stands out is we were phoned up the one day just randomly by Seychelles Tourism. And they were having a carnival, and they wanted to know if we would come and cover it. So you can imagine we did a lot of gymnastics to try and find.
Did you say yes from the airport?
Pretty much. We did a lot of gymnastics to try and find environmental angles so that we could justify going to Seychelles for a week. But to be fair, there's a lot going on there, and it was a wonderful episode. Indeed. Yeah, we did the last one we did before I left actually was also from Victoria Falls, and that also is just an extraordinary experience to be able to kind of remote in the whole team to a live location and shoot a whole episode. It's enormously hard work, but lots of fun at the same time. My favorite stories were always the big sort of conservation stories. You know, I worked very closely with Bertus Lowe. He's still a presenter and producer on 50/50, and he just is, he's so talented with his production of conservation stories. So he showcased a lot of the African parks reserves up in Africa for us while we were at 50/50. He did Zakuma in Chad. Extraordinary story there of how they managed to work with the local people to reverse elephant poaching. And basically the Ganjaweed would come through the area and sort of rape and pillage and just, you know, destroy villages. And so obviously the local people didn't want them around any more than the elephants wanted them around, because they were going to get shot. And just through building relationship with the local people and giving them a radio and saying, you know, you let us know when they're coming, we'll come and protect you. They were able to work hand in hand and reverse the elephant poaching scenario. And I love stories like that, where you know, it's conservation as a land use that has both economic value for the people in the area, and also wins their hearts and minds, because it makes a huge difference to their lives. It shouldn't just be a token thing. And that's a lovely story where that really worked. And you know, a couple of rangers lost their lives protecting elephants in that area the year we did the story. And then the Latreg Marathon was then initiated, which was a run through the Enedi Desert, also in Chad, excuse me, as a fundraiser. And how people just you know, all rallied to get to the desert to go and run this marathon in solidarity with these rangers. So I mean, that's one that really stands out. We showcased a lot of the other really beautiful remote reserves, and just to be able to see these places that you didn't even know existed. I mean, who knew that Chad, of all countries, had a savanna that was teeming with elephants? You know, just
I certainly didn't. Yeah. I do now.
Yeah.
But you know, you mentioned Vic Falls. I wonder, when Livingstone first heard those falls, what his first thoughts were. Were they perhaps, did I leave the tap running when I left home? Because he had no point of reference for those things, and I'm sure he did not know what to expect when he sort of came around a corner and there was the smoke that thunders type of thing.
Yeah, I'm sure he didn't mistake it for a tap that had been left on, that's for sure. More like an army of mounted, you know, horse-mounted soldiers storming in his direction. I mean, that if you've been there, you've heard that thundering water, and it is loud.
I've microlighted over the falls, and I'm sorry, I don't like heights, and specifically in a microlight, because those things are just lawnmowers with engines, or lawnmowers with wings, and they don't so much glide as plummet when that engine switches off. I had visions of falling into a gorge, and my pilot is going, no, take pictures. I'm clinging to my cameras like they're going, like they're a parachute. And he wants, lean over the side, have a look, you know. I'll sort of do this and do that, and I'm going, please don't, just fly straight and level, and then take us back and put us down, because, you know, terra firma is what I like, and the firmer it is, the less the terror. For me, anyway.
Yeah, no, for me as well. I'm absolutely petrified of heights. So
don't
know if I would have coped.
Meg, which was the next book for you?
Oh, crumbs. You know, the 100 Bushveld Trees, which originally was published as If Trees Could Talk.
Yeah.
Was being developed at the same time as I was doing Nature and Pact. They're published by different publishers, but I was kind of working on them concurrently.
And that is Breezer.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So Nature and Pact is really, you asked me right at the beginning if there was a sequel to Game Ranger in Your Backpack, and basically Nature and Pact is sort of that. So what we did is we took Game Ranger and we reduced the quantity of information on offer for each species, and we expanded the extent. So rather than just South Africa and the Lowveld region, we looked at Southern Africa. So all the dryland species that you don't get in Kruger, bat-eared foxes and Gemsbok, and the jackal species and hyena species that you get in the drier areas, those are all included in Nature and Pact, more as a Southern African book. Breezer were looking for something that they could potentially offer to an international market who maybe didn't know what the Lowveld was. And that's how Nature and Pact came about. So it's very similar content to Game Ranger. There's just a broader spectrum of species. Game Ranger was very much taking a scoop of the most common species that you find in the Lowveld and sort of expanding on that. And then I mentioned earlier the call finder technology. So Nature and Pact is embedded with that call finder technology. So you get a wand, and the pictures have this very fine grid on them. Some of the pictures anyway. And if actually I don't know if it's the pictures in this one. In the bird book it works like that, but this has got a little icon that you touch the call finder to, and the sounds that the animals make are there, and then each of the Latin names there that you're pointing to are pronounced as well, so that you can hear what they sound like. So just even more sort of Game Ranger in your backpack in the Nature and Pact, and that you've got sounds as well.
and a different photographer for this one.
Yes, a different photographer. So Shem and I go way back. He's a very, very good friend. We studied together at Sarsveld, and we're just looking to collaborate on some projects, and he just has an extraordinary library of material, and we worked together on the tree book. He did all the stylized photos and the close-ups on the tree book, and then sort of Nature and Pact evolved out of us working on that project on the tree book together.
His images are stunning. They really and truly are.
He's an exceptionally talented photographer. He's one of the up and coming. That's correct. C4's photo safaris. And goes to some amazing places. Photographs polar bears in Canada, and
I know. You've got to hate those sort of people.
Goes to Ethiopia and all these way out places, and just extraordinary safaris. So
just as an aside, Meg, if I may, your most extraordinary sightings while you were sort of spending time in the bush, what were they?
It's such a hard question to answer, because there's been, in 25 years, how do you quantify your most extraordinary sighting, I suppose? There's been amazing stuff. And for me, I am always moved by those moments where, my husband and I recently went to the Magaliesberg, for example, just to get out of lockdown. And we were camping in this beautiful sort of, I think it must have been an old kraal, like a stone thing, and there's a fireplace in the one part of it, and then you camp in the other part of it, just a single campsite, pioneer camping, so no water, no electricity. And I mean, for me, the best part of that trip was the fact that there was a shrew living inside the rocks. So I was getting dinner ready, and I heard the scratch, 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 and I thought, oh my God, it can't be a lizard at this time of the night. And I took my torch and I went and couldn't, and then this little shrew came out. And I mean, I haven't seen a shrew in years. I'm not talking about elephant shrews, just like a normal, rodent-looking shrew.
Yeah.
And I was so excited. Those nights where you've lost, your sort of midnight munchies that you've stashed in your tent to the dormice that have come and, snacked on them, and you've caught them red-handed. I just love moments like that. You come around a corner and there's a tiny little ground bird that's got its babies, a little button quail standing in the middle of the road with these tiny babies, and they can't go anywhere because the babies can't move fast enough, and it takes them a few minutes to get off the road. Sightings like that are what stay with me. A honey badger walking down, the Letaba River early one morning in the mist.
Those are animals with attitude. I just love them because they just stomp down the road going, touch me if you, take me on if you dare, because I will rip your face off without breaking stride.
Yeah, I mean, I spent time, for the big and hairies. I spent time up in the Luangwa Valley working on a documentary for Aquavision many, many years ago. And I mean, there it was, such phenomenal action almost on a daily basis. We were watching hippos fighting to the death, hippos starving to death, or dying of sunburn, because when the river contracts, there's 30,000 hippos in that river, and they move into the Wafwas, into the Oxbow lagoons. And then, as the lagoons dry out, so do the hippos. Yeah. And then the lions go in there in the mud, and they're like trying to kill a half-dead hippo and feeding. And then the hyenas come, and there's a big fight, and the vultures arrive. And so you have this, the stuff horror movies are made of, actually, because they're completely covered in black mud. And you watch this like killing scene. The hippos that die in the river, there's obviously heaps of crocodiles, and they'll come and they'll start ripping the hippos apart, and then a lion will come and pull the carcass out, and you'll get this interaction between the lions and the crocodiles, with the lions smacking the crocodile on the head and the crocodiles kind of revving the lion. I mean, all of that stuff is super spectacular, and to have seen that, I've watched leopards killing pythons, and those kind of sightings. Yeah, I mean, talk about a cat and mouse game. That was an interesting one. But yeah, I mean, I can't quantify it. To me, just that moment when the sun rises and you've got your cup of coffee and you're standing on your veranda outside your tent or outside your chalet and listening to the bird calls, and and a little kingfisher comes and lands there, or a little mongoose runs by. Those, to me, that's the magic.
Yeah, that's the essence. That's what I hope my blog will promote, is the fact that it's not all just about the big five, or now they're being called the iconic game species, trying to get away from the hunting terminology of the big five. And because they are exactly that, dormice, nachapis. We were talking earlier about the eco training camp at Makuleke, and they've got bush babies there that, if you don't know what they are and you're not expecting them, they bounce off your tent in the middle of the night, and it can be rather a daunting experience because they're big and they make quite a noise when they land on your tent. But it's those sort of things that I think people are getting to experience more and more, and they're not just getting to a reserve and going, show us the big five and then we can go home. Let's stop and have a look at the dung beetle. I found an aardvark for the first time in 53 years 6 weeks ago, and first found it at 4:30 in the afternoon, and the ranger had said to me, they do tend to come out, they're nocturnal, but they come out in the late afternoon because it's winter and it's cold and it's starting to get dark. So I said, okay, understandable, and we followed it for 20 minutes or so. Next morning, 11:30, blazing sun. Here's the same aardvark. Didn't get the memo. Out and about, snuffling around looking for food. And I turned to the ranger and I went, and this, whatever module you learned about this, I would put a line through it and go, they know best.
Well, that's what I wanted to say about my books. You mentioned earlier that it's still relevant 10 years later, but the fact of the matter is that animals don't read the books. No. So you're always going to find that, this is the norm, but there'll always be an exception.
There's always one that wants to spoil it for everybody else.
Yeah, and my husband Andrew and I were talking yesterday. When he was a youngster, he did a leopard project in Thorny Bush, and basically it was just him and his tracker Elias, and they lived together for a year, just tracking leopards and trying to get a handle on what was going on at the time. The leopard sightings were really poor, and the leopards were being persecuted and that sort of thing. And he was just saying, that Elias always used to say to him, the animal is okay until it's not.
Yeah.
And that it's like, until it changes its mind, you don't know, particularly when you're walking on foot and you're approaching animals, you don't know what's happened half an hour before, 2 hours before in the history of that animal. You don't know if it's got a sore tooth. Sounds ridiculous, but elephants do not do well when they've got sore teeth.
Ask
You
Lawrence
don't know
Anthony.
if they've encountered persecution, anything like that. You don't know if something's just had a territorial dispute and is in a particularly bad mood. And I mean, you hear stories like lions don't climb trees because they're too heavy, but you turn on Wild Earth and tune into some of the lions on the Pindar Game Reserve, and they're up the trees all the time. So nothing is ever cast in stone with wildlife, and that's why it's so important that we approach it with respect and just hold lightly that we don't know we don't know everything about it. We've probably just scratched the surface. So
it's the same with road rage. The road rage incident is just the end of a whole string of incidents that may have occurred in the day or weeks prior to whatever that spark is. And as you say, you come around the corner and there's a leopard sitting and looking at you. It's not wearing a sign that says, "Leave me alone, I've had a tough day," or "I've got a headache," or whatever. It's either going to try and eat you or it's going to run away.
No, exactly. Yeah.
So that was Nature Unpacked, and as we said, this is a breezer publication, as was Game Ranger in your backpack. And then the new one, or newish one, is Strake, and that's 100 bushveld trees. Now, why 100 trees? Why not 50? Why not 99? Why make it 101 trees? Come, Meg. Why 100?
You might find that there is actually 101 or 102 in there, because some of them are in tables. So I don't know if it's exactly 100. But I mean, where do you draw the line? To be honest, as I mentioned earlier with Game Ranger in your backpack, you have to just take a scoop of the most commonly encountered stuff to make a headway into teaching people about them, and the same with trees. It's like, where do you draw the line? And it was basically just going, okay, well, these are the 100 of the most common trees that you're going to encounter out there. I have a friend who's doing a tree book on the trees in Kruger, and I think he's up to about 600 species now. So,
you're going to need. Does his book come with a trailer so that you can?
It's going to need to. It's going to need to. I think it's going to be quite a volume, but really, it was like taking the most common trees out there, or groups of trees anyway, and trying to give people some insight. And obviously things like the combretums, there's multiple species, the old acacias, the vachelias and senegalias, there's a lot of them, so it kind of makes up quite a chunk of the 100. But it was, if you're going to go to the bush, particularly the lower veld, but there are high veld trees in there as well, these are the trees that you are most likely to encounter.
Right. I remember years ago going to a particular reserve in the north of KwaZulu-Natal, and the owner of the reserve said, "Listen, I'm going to take you." They mainly had elephant in that particular reserve, and he said, "I'm going to take you out on a tree game drive today." And I thought,
those are my best.
Tree game drive. I can't think of any. I would rather slit my wrists or have my tonsils removed with an oyster fork. By the end of that 4-hour drive, I was slack-jawed and agape at the man's knowledge. And he brought trees to life for me. And I realized then that I was being a bit precious about, just show me the elephants or other things that have 4 legs. Trees are fascinating. And if you listen to people who know them and who love them and who can tell you stories about them or uses for them, like the knobthorn and what that can be used for, specifically from a cultural point of view, that it becomes so special. And again, a book that you should be carrying with you so that you can identify trees, although they don't run. If you stop your vehicle next to them, they will sit there and wait for you to take pictures and do all of that, do the identification without running away.
Yeah, David, I think what makes 100 bushveld trees different anyway to other tree books, and I always sort of, when I give talks and that kind of thing, preface them with the fact that I'm not an expert in anything. I'm just an enthusiast, and I'm an enthusiast who's keen to share that enthusiasm. And so my tree book, I wrote very much from a layman point of view. So if you read the language in the book, it doesn't talk about, you know, petiolules and margins and all of that. I've really tried to simplify everything into very normal English language in a way that anybody who picks that book up would be able to then recognize the features that are being discussed. And also just using Shem's amazing photographic skills and really taking close-up photos of the leaves, of the flowers, of the bark, so that people can see at a glance without even reading really what those components look like. And then right at the beginning of the book, I also have developed my own little identification sort of acronym. It's the Samson Bee Fish. And if you can remember that acronym and what everything stands for, then when you're standing in front of a tree, you should be able to then, you see there, the S is for simple or compound leaf, the arrangement, the margin, etc. You should be able to work through that acronym, and by the time you get to the end of it, know what tree you're looking at, or at least know the features of the tree that you're looking at, and then be able to work it out from there.
Meg, if you had to do leaves and fruits and flowers and that type of thing, how long did this book take you to put together? Because trees are seasonal. I suppose that's the biggest change, is you would have to have gone back more than once to photograph the same tree in different outfits.
Absolutely. And also, I mean, I was quite determined that we photographed the trees in, you know, sort of their most splendid time. Yes. So, for example, the cassias, the sjambok pod trees, just are covered in those beautiful yellow flowers before they get their leaves. So at the end of winter, and at the end of winter is not a great time for photographing anything else.
Yeah.
So yes, there were a couple of trips backwards and forwards. It took us a good year. And I mean, both Shem and I were working on other projects at the time, or I was with 50-50 at the time. So I mean, it was mostly restricted to weekends and holidays and that kind of thing. But it was really just careful planning, because you know more or less when you're going to get the fruit or the flowers. It did take a bit of toing and froing, but then I also did tap into friends and resources where, for example, we were missing a fruit here or a flower there on a hard to capture photograph, because some of these things also, like the flowers are nondescript, so to get the photos is super difficult. So my friend Ted Woods, who I mentioned just now, is doing this massive tree book, was very kind to give us a lot of photographs from his collection as well. But yeah, it did take a good year to put that one together.
Because I made a mistake. I suppose my biggest tree mistake was standing in a reserve with some students and asking the head trainer, do you have any sickle bush in this area? And the students burst out laughing. And Philip looked at me and he said, David, we are standing in a sickle bush forest. And the reason that I didn't recognize them was I'd never seen their flowers before. And those little Chinese lantern flowers are beautiful. I mean,
really
Landrovus pupillus, which is the Latin name for sickle bush because it destroys tires and makes for great briarwood. But their flowers are beautiful. So I've learned subsequently, I ask nothing when it comes to trees unless somebody else brings it up. And then I can go, oh, but I see your sickle bush aren't in flower at the moment. If I've learned nothing else. Christmas time, if I've learned nothing else at all. Meg, let's just go through your books once again. Strake, which is also Penguin Random House, which is 100 bushveld trees, which you did together with Shem. Also, he says, reaching right over halfway across the room, Nature Unpacked, again, you and Shem, and this is a Breezer publication. And then, of course, this tome that everybody who goes to the bush should have one of these. And if you are a bush person and you have an anniversary or a birthday or getting out of lockdown coming up, you should have one of these. where, and this is also a Breezer publication, where are they available currently? Can you get them online? Are they available in bookstores still?
No, absolutely. All three of the books are available either online. What is it called? Africa. There's a wonderful online book store,
Is it
ANC or
African
something.
Books?
Adventures with Nature, AWN.
Okay.
Adventures with Nature. I think that's what it's called. He does all the natural history books and at good prices. So that's a good version. Otherwise, Take a Lot. And yeah, exclusives sell all of them. Readers' warehouses sell all of them. Otherwise, directly from the publishers. They're freely available in most locations. The Kruger shops usually stock the Game Ranger. So yeah, relatively easy to get hold of.
And where to next for Meg? What are you going to be doing now that we're in level 3 and we can get out and about?
Yeah, it's a good question actually. Well, currently I'm working with And Beyond, the travel company, doing video material for them to help them stay connected with their worldwide clients while they can't travel, and just loving it. I just love the And Beyond brand and the just the ethic and the ethos of the company and their style of guiding and just doing all those things we've spoken about getting people up close and personal to all the elements of nature, not just the big and hairies. And so, yeah, just loving my time there at the moment. My husband is working on securing secondary protected areas in Africa for conservation. And as such, there are big adventures coming up because he has to go to all these very remote places to go and see these things. So we have a little Jimny, which we've kitted out for expeditions. And the two of us are going to be jumping in that and going off to remote parts of Namibia and Mozambique and Zimbabwe and Zambia in the next year. And I'm sure there'll be lots of photographing and lots of writing that takes place as a result of that. So whether it's just kind of work blogging and that kind of thing for him, or whether new books arise out of it, that remains to be seen. But it's in my blood, so.
Before I say goodbye and thank you, I have to ask you, have you named the Jiminy cricket?
Yes, we have. His name is Jungle Jim, mostly because he's jungle green. And
Okay.
I've always driven a Jimny for the last 10 years. I've just recently traded in my old one for a new one, and it's the jungle green, and I've always called my Jimny Jim, so it's Jungle Jim.
Fair enough. My in conversation guest today has been Meg Parker. Meg, thank you so much for chatting to me. I look forward to your next book about your new adventures, and I wish you and Andrew all of the very, very best going forward.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. It's been good to chat.